Admiral Kexthar's antennae twitched as the cacophony of beeps, explosions, and children's excited shouts filled the neon-lit arcade. His species had prepared him for many aspects of human culture, but the concept of entertainment centers still baffled him. Through his crystalline monocle, he focused on a small human male who couldn't have seen more than 12 planetary rotations. Tommy Anderson stood on the raised platform of the Starfleet Commander console, his fingers dancing across the holographic controls with an almost musical rhythm. The massive screen before him displayed a chaotic space battle, with multiple enemy squadrons converging on his position. "He's going to break another record," whispered an older teen, drawing the Admiral's attention. A crowd had formed around the platform, their eyes fixed on Tommy's performance. Kexthar noted how the other children showed no signs of jealousy, only admiration and excitement. The Admiral's training kicked in as he analyzed Tommy's strategy. The boy had positioned his fleet in what appeared to be a vulnerable formation, practically inviting the enemy aid to attack. But something about the setup nagged at the back of Kexthar's military mind. "Watch this," Tommy announced to his audience, a slight grin playing across his face. "They always fall for it." The enemy ships took the bait, charging into what looked like an easy victory. At the last possible moment, Tommy's fingers flew across the controls. His ships executed a series of maneuvers that should have been impossible in real space combat. The formation collapsed inward, creating a gravitational slingshot that caught the enemy fleet in a devastating crossfire. Kexthar's inner eyelids snapped open in shock. The maneuver was a perfect recreation of the legendary battle of Proxima Centauri, where human forces had defeated a superior alien fleet. But that battle had happened before this child was born. "That's how you do the Anderson spiral," one of the younger kids shouted, making the Admiral's scales ripple with surprise. They had named the maneuver after the boy. Tommy's score counter spun upward as ship after ship succumbed to his strategy. But instead of pressing his advantage, he quickly reorganized his fleet into a defensive position that protected the civilian transport ships. An action that wasn't even required by the game's victory conditions. "Always secure the civilians first," Tommy explained to a wide-eyed 8-year-old who had asked why. "Points are nice, but protection is the real mission." The Admiral made a note in his neural recorder. The boy's instincts aligned perfectly with advanced military doctrine, yet he treated it as common sense. As the final enemy ships attempted to retreat, Tommy executed another series of commands. His fleet split into 3 groups, each one moving in patterns that seemed random at first. But Kexthar recognized the underlying mathematics. The ships were creating a 3-dimensional mesh of overlapping fields of fire. "Game over," the console announced as the last enemy ship disappeared in a flash of pixelated fire. The crowd erupted in cheers as Tommy's score appeared at the top of the leaderboard. Stepping down from the platform, Tommy high-fived his friends before noticing the tall alien observer in the corner. He gave the Admiral a respectful nod, then pointed at the console. "Would you like to try, sir? First game's on me." Kexthar declined with a graceful gesture, but his mind was racing. In the past hour, he had watched a human child casually deploy tactics that had taken his species centuries to develop. More disturbing still was the fact that none of the humans seemed to recognize the significance of what they were doing. As Tommy and his friends moved on to another game, the Admiral opened a secure channel to the Galactic Defense Council. His report was brief but urgent. "Investigation of human entertainment centers. Reveals concerning development. Request permission to extend observation period." These are not games. I repeat, these are not games. The console's attract mode activated, its screen showing various space battles and maneuvers. Kexthar watched as another group of children eagerly approached the machine, ready to learn warfare through play. never realizing they were preparing for a future their species hoped would never come. The next week found Admiral Kexthar back at the arcade, his crystalline monocle recording every nuance of the scene unfolding before him. Tommy Anderson had brought a new player today, Jessica Miller, a tall girl with red hair pulled back in a ponytail and a determined look in her eyes. "The trick is to feel the ship's movement," Tommy explained, standing behind the second player pod of the Starfleet Commander console. "Don't just follow the tutorial patterns." Jessica nodded, her hands hovering over the holographic controls. "Like in zero-G basketball, you have to think in all directions at once." The Admiral's antennae perked up at this comparison. Their species had never considered the connection between recreational sports and space combat training. The simulation began, and Jessica's first attempts were predictably clumsy. Her ships moved in rigid formations, following the game's basic guidelines. But then something changed. She started moving her fleet like they were players on a court, creating space and drawing enemy ships into defensive patterns. "That's it," Tommy exclaimed. "Now try running a pick and roll with your cruisers." The Admiral watched in fascination as Jessica adapted basketball strategies to space combat. Her destroyers screened for larger ships, creating paths through the enemy formation that shouldn't have been possible. The game's AI struggled to counter moves it had never been programmed to expect. "Look at this," Jessica called out, her fingers dancing across the controls. She sent a wing of small fighters spinning around a larger cruiser, using its gravitational field to accelerate. The maneuver looked like a complex dance, with each ship building up speed until they were launched like bullets toward the enemy fleet. Tommy's eyes widened. "That's not in any of the strategy guides." "I call it the slingshot waltz," Jessica said, grinning as her fighters tore through the enemy formation. "If it works in dance, why not in space?" Kexthar quickly added to his notes. The humans were instinctively applying principles from their various physical activities to three-dimensional combat. More importantly, they were teaching each other, building on each discovery. A small crowd had gathered again. But this time, they were watching something unprecedented. Tommy and Jessica had synchronized their fleets, moving them in patterns that resembled complex partner dances. Their ships weaved between each other, creating defensive screens while setting up devastating attack runs. "It's like double Dutch with spaceships," one young observer commented, making the others laugh. But the Admiral wasn't amused. He was terrified. These children were casually inventing tactics that would revolutionize space combat. The game's difficulty automatically increased, throwing larger waves of enemies at the young players. Instead of being overwhelmed, they seemed to thrive on the challenge. Jessica's dance-inspired movements merged seamlessly with Tommy's more traditional strategies, creating something entirely new. "Hey, if we time the gravitational fields just right," Jessica started, "we can create a wave effect." Tommy finished her thought. Their fingers flew over the controls in perfect synchronization. The Admiral watched in awe as their combined fleets generated a rippling pattern of gravitational distortions. Enemy ships caught in the wave were thrown off course, their formations shattered. It was beautiful, elegant, and absolutely lethal. New high score. The game announced, its leaderboard updating to show their combined score at the top. The crowd cheered, but Kexthar barely heard them. His mind was racing with the implications of what he'd just witnessed. As the children celebrated their victory, the Admiral discreetly sent another message to the Galactic Defense Council. Humans are combining multiple physical disciplines with space combat. Their children create new tactics through play. Traditional military doctrine may be obsolete. Jessica and Tommy were already planning their next session, discussing how to incorporate other sports and dance moves into their strategy. The Admiral listened intently as they casually deconstructed centuries of established space combat theory, replacing it with something far more unpredictable. "Same time tomorrow," Jessica asked, her eyes still bright with excitement. "Wouldn't miss it," Tommy replied. "I want to try that spiral thing," with a ballet spin added. The Admiral watched them leave, his scales shifting colors with concern. In just one afternoon, 2 human children had fundamentally changed his understanding of space combat. He could only wonder what they would come up with next. 3 days later, the arcade was unusually crowded. Admiral Kexthar maintained his observation post near the vintage pinball machines as Tommy and Jessica demonstrated their latest innovation to an enthusiastic audience. But something had changed in the way they communicated. Executing Nutcracker formation, Jessica called out, her hands moving in a fluid motion that reminded the Admiral of a symphony conductor. Her fleet split into 2 synchronized groups that began moving in an intricate pattern. "Roger that." Running Thunder Defense, Tommy responded, his ships moving to support Jessica's maneuver. The Admiral noticed they had developed their own combat language, taking terms from dance and sports to describe complex military formations. A small group of military officers in civilian clothes had also started frequenting the arcade. They tried to look casual, but Kexthar's training spotted their careful observation of the children's techniques. "Watch how they process the 3-dimensional space," one officer whispered to another. "No hesitation, no mental mapping. It's all intuitive." The game threw a new scenario at the young players. A dense asteroid field with multiple enemy squadrons. Instead of avoiding the obstacles, Jessica treated the asteroids like partners in an elaborate dance, using their gravitational fields to execute maneuvers that the Admiral's species had never imagined possible. "Remember the ice skating competition last winter?" Jessica called to Tommy. "Same principle." Tommy grinned, immediately understanding. Their ships began moving like figure skaters, using the asteroids as pivot points for complex maneuvers. Enemy vessels trying to follow were caught in the gravitational chaos and spun out of control. The Admiral's attention was drawn to a man in the back of the crowd, Marcus Reynolds, one of the lead developers of Starfleet Commander. His presence confirmed Kexthar's growing suspicions about the game's true purpose. "They're better than the AI now," Reynolds muttered into a discrete communication device. "The neural network can't keep up with their innovations." A new alert flashed on the screen. A supposedly random event that the Admiral recognized as a recreation of a historical space battle. But before the game could even finish presenting the scenario, Tommy and Jessica had already begun their counter-strategy. "Classic pincer move," one of the undercover officers commented. "But look how they've modified it." Instead of following traditional military doctrine, the children had added elements of basketball zone defense and ballet positioning. Their ships moved in patterns that seemed chaotic at first glance, but revealed their deadly efficiency as the battle unfolded. "Did you see that?" Jessica exclaimed, as their combined fleet executed a particularly complex maneuver, just like the double play we practiced in baseball. The Admiral made another urgent note. The humans had found a way to turn their sports and arts into warfare, but more importantly, they had made it fun. Their children were eagerly learning advanced combat techniques without realizing the skills they were developing. Marcus Reynolds approached the console as the battle concluded, pretending to check the machine's settings. "Impressive strategies, kids. Ever considered joining the Space Force Academy?" "Maybe someday," Tommy replied, his attention already on the next challenge. "But right now, we're just having fun." The developer exchanged a knowing look with the military officers before departing. The Admiral added this interaction to his growing file of evidence about Earth's subtle military preparation program. As the afternoon continued, more children joined in, learning the new techniques from Tommy and Jessica. They created their own variations, adding elements from their various hobbies and interests. The language of space combat was being rewritten by kids who thought they were just playing a game. Kexthar's final report for the day was his most urgent yet. Human children are not simply playing. They are unconsciously developing a new form of space combat doctrine. Their natural creativity, combined with their species' various physical disciplines, is producing strategies that our military theorists never conceived. Most concerning of all, they're teaching each other. As the arcade began to empty for the evening, the Admiral watched Tommy and Jessica planning their next session. Their casual discussion of complex combat maneuvers, mixed with talk about homework and school events, only reinforced his growing concern. Earth's greatest military asset wasn't its technology or its armies. It was its children's ability to turn warfare into play. The global tournament announcement transformed the quiet local arcade into a buzzing hive of activity. Admiral Kexthar observed from his new position near the snack bar as Tommy and Jessica prepared for their qualifying round, their usual confidence tinged with nervous energy. 16 locations worldwide, all playing simultaneously. Tommy read from the holographic display. They've never done anything like this before. The Admiral noticed several new additions to the arcade. Advanced recording equipment, disguised as decorative fixtures, and more military personnel attempting to blend in with the growing crowd. Something beyond a simple gaming tournament was unfolding. Welcome to the Starfleet Commander Global Challenge. The announcement boomed through the arcade speakers. Today's qualifying round will feature never-before-seen scenarios. Good luck, Commanders. Jessica cracked her knuckles as she took position at the controls. Did you see the new gravitational mechanics they added in the last update? It's like they're testing something. The first round began, and the Admiral's antennae twitched in recognition. The scenario wasn't random. It was a classified tactical situation from an ongoing border dispute in the Orion sector. He watched as Tommy and Jessica, without realizing it, began developing solutions to a real military problem. The enemy formation looks different, Tommy noted, his fingers dancing across the controls. More organic, less predictable. A military observer near Kexthar whispered into his communication device. They're adapting to the new AI patterns faster than expected. The tournament scenarios grew progressively more complex. Each round introduced new variables that the Admiral recognized from real combat situations. The children, however, approached these challenges with an unrestrained creativity that left the hidden military observers frantically taking notes. Look at their response to the quantum wake distortions, one observer muttered. They're treating them like weather patterns in a video game. Jessica had indeed developed a new strategy, using the spatial distortions like a surfer riding waves. Her fleet moved through the chaos with an elegance that made the traditional military approach look clumsy and outdated. Tommy, remember that time we played in the rain? She called out. Same principle. Use the turbulence. The Admiral watched as other competitors around the world began adopting and modifying Tommy and Jessica's techniques. Through the global network, new strategies were being shared and refined in real time. The children had created a tactical think tank without realizing it. During a brief break between rounds, Marcus Reynolds approached the console again, this time with a group of scientists poorly disguised as tournament officials. They made subtle adjustments to the system while pretending to perform routine maintenance. Final round coming up, Reynolds announced. This one's special, a scenario nobody has ever encountered before. The Admiral's scales rippled with recognition as the screen displayed the starting configuration. It was an exact replica of the classified fleet movements his intelligence division had detected near the Gamma Quadrant last week. Tommy and Jessica exchanged a quick look before their hands found the controls. They had no way of knowing they were about to engage with a real strategic problem that had the Galactic Defense Council in deadlock. This feels different, Tommy said, studying the enemy patterns. More real. Then let's try something unreal, Jessica replied with a grin. She began implementing a strategy that combined elements of chess, synchronized swimming, and orbital mechanics. The hidden military officers leaned forward as the young players systematically took apart what had been considered an unsolvable tactical situation. Their solution was unconventional, unprecedented, and undeniably effective. Admiral Kekstar's final report for the day was brief, but heavy with implications. The tournament is a cover. Earth is using these events to crowdsource military solutions from their young. Most concerning development, it's working. As the finals concluded, with Tommy and Jessica's team qualifying for the global championships, the Admiral watched Reynolds and his team quickly downloading the battle data. These children had just unknowingly solved a military crisis that had stumped the best tacticians in the galaxy. "Next week's going to be even better," Tommy said, as they prepared to leave. "They're adding some new feature called real-time response integration." The Admiral's inner eyelids flickered with concern. He had a growing suspicion about what that new feature really meant, and why this tournament was happening now of all times. The week before the global finals found Admiral Kekstar reviewing his recordings of Tommy's latest practice sessions. Something about the boy's recent strategies had been nagging at his military mind, and finally he made the connection. They were perfect mirrors of classified combat maneuvers. Initiating Deep Space Protocol, Tommy announced to the growing crowd at the arcade. His fingers moved across the controls in a pattern that made the Admiral's scales shift color in recognition. It was an exact match for a top-secret defensive formation developed by the Galactic fleet just 3 months ago. Jessica stood at her station, her red hair now tied back with a tournament competitor's bandana. "Running interference pattern Delta," she called out, her fleet moving in a complex dance that somehow countered the supposedly unbeatable strategy. The Admiral's private channel to the Defense Council lit up immediately. "The girl has just invalidated 6 years of tactical development in under 4 minutes." More players had joined their practice session, creating an impromptu team exercise. The arcade systems had been upgraded for tournament preparation, now allowing up to 12 players to connect simultaneously. The Admiral noticed how they naturally fell into command structures without any formal organization. "Marcus," Tommy called out to the developer, who had become a regular observer, "the neural response is different today. Did you guys change something?" Reynolds tried to look casual, but the Admiral caught his quick glance at a hidden display. "Just some tournament optimization." "How does it feel?" "More real," Jessica answered before Tommy could. "Like the ships have actual weight and momentum." "I love it." The Admiral's secondary hearts nearly stopped. They had connected the game to actual ship response data. These children were learning to feel the true physics of space combat while thinking they were just getting better graphics. A new scenario appeared on their screens, a complex battle setup that the Admiral recognized from a recent skirmish in the Carina sector. Tommy's response was immediate and instinctive, his fleet moving in ways that made the original resolution look amateur by comparison. "Check this out," Tommy called to his teammates. "If we time our gravity wells just right." His ships created a cascading series of spatial distortions that the enemy AI couldn't process fast enough to counter. One of the hidden military observers whispered into his comm unit, "The Anderson maneuver just rendered our current defense doctrine obsolete, requesting immediate protocol update." Jessica had been quiet for the last few minutes, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Something's different about these enemy patterns," she finally said. "They're not following the usually programmed responses. It's almost like..." She trailed off, but the Admiral finished her thought in his mind. The game was now connected to real combat analysis systems. The children were fighting against actual battle computer predictions. "Global Tournament Network Test Initiating," the system announced. Suddenly, their screen showed player statistics from around the world. Hundreds of young competitors were online, their combined fleets moving in massive, coordinated patterns. "This is amazing," Tommy exclaimed, watching as players from Tokyo, London, and Sao Paulo joined their practice session. It's like we're all in sync. The Admiral's final report for the day was his most urgent yet. Earth has created a global neural network of young tactical minds. Their children are unknowingly coordinating fleet movements on a planetary scale. Traditional military response plans are now obsolete. As the practice session wound down, Marcus Reynolds approached Tommy and Jessica with what looked like tournament passes, but the Admiral's enhanced vision recognized as military-grade neural interface devices. "You've both been selected for the advanced bracket," Reynolds said, handing them the disguised equipment. "These will help you feel the game better." The Admiral watched as the young players excitedly accepted the devices, never realizing they were being connected to something far more significant than a tournament. Earth was building an army of natural space tacticians, and their greatest weapons were joy and imagination. "Tomorrow's going to be epic," Tommy said as they packed up for the day. "I can't wait to see what new challenges they throw at us." The Admiral's scales darkened with concern. He had a strong feeling that tomorrow's challenges would be more real than any of these children could imagine. The day of the tournament finals started like any other at the arcade, but Admiral Kexthar's trained senses detected an unusual tension in the air. Military personnel had doubled overnight, their casual disguises barely concealing combat-ready equipment. Tommy and Jessica took their positions at the enhanced tournament consoles, now equipped with the neural interface devices they'd received yesterday. The massive display screens around the arcade showed similar setups in gaming centers across the globe. "Final tournament calibration in progress," the system announced. "Stand by for neural sync." The Admiral watched as Marcus Reynolds paced behind the technical station, his eyes fixed on a hidden display. Suddenly, the developer's hand flew to his earpiece. "Sir," he whispered urgently into his comm unit, "they're here, 3 hours earlier than intelligence predicted." The tournament screens flickered, and the standard game interface transformed. The Admiral recognized the new display format. It was an actual military command and control system, disguised with gaming graphics. "Special event scenario loading," the system announced cheerfully. "Pirates of the Outer Rim challenge engaging." Tommy leaned forward, excited by the new content. These ships look different, more detailed. "Because they're real," the Admiral whispered to himself, watching as actual tactical data from Earth's defense network was fed into the game's interface. Jessica's eyes narrowed as she studied the incoming patterns. "These pirates don't move like the AI. Their formations are sloppy, emotional." The first shots were fired in high orbit, but on the gaming screens, it appeared as just another tournament round. Tommy's fingers danced across the controls, his fleet moving to intercept what he thought were computer-generated threats. Multiple contacts, bearing 317, called out a player from the Tokyo arcade. Their voice translated in real time. Moving to engage. The global gaming network had become a battlefield command center. Children around the world coordinated complex military maneuvers, believing they were competing for tournament points while actually defending their planet. "Tommy, they're trying to flank the civilian stations," Jessica called out, her fleet already moving to intercept. Her years of dance training translated into graceful ship movements that the pirates couldn't predict or counter. Reynolds watched the real battle data with growing amazement. "They're better than our best combat eye. They're not just fighting. They're improvising." The pirates, expecting to face traditional military responses, found themselves against an enemy that fought like children at play. Ships moved in patterns based on basketball plays and ballet formations, making their actions impossible to predict. "Running the Anderson Spiral," Tommy announced, his signature move now coordinated with players from 6 different countries. The pirate fleet's formation shattered under the attack, their ships scattered by maneuvers no adult would have conceived. Jessica had gone quiet, her total focus on the display, as she coordinated defense of the civilian sectors. "Something's not right about these score calculations," she muttered. "They're too precise." The Admiral saw the moment of realization cross her face. The points appearing on her screen matched exactly with real-time casualty and damage reports. But before she could voice her discovery, Tommy called out, "Jessica, remember that move from the ice skating championships?" Her concern vanished as she grinned. "Triple axle defense pattern. Let's do it." Their combined fleets moved in what appeared to be a chaotic spin, but generated a gravitational shear that trapped the remaining pirates in a web of spatial distortions. Tournament victory achieved. The system announced as the last pirate ships either surrendered or were disabled. New global high score recorded. The Admiral's final report was brief. Earth's defense strategy confirmed. They've armed their planet with the most unpredictable weapon in the galaxy, the imagination of their children. As cleanup crews disguised as tournament officials began shutting down the systems, Tommy and Jessica celebrated what they thought was just another gaming victory. "Next tournament's going to be even better," Tommy said, looking at his trophy. The Admiral watched as Marcus Reynolds received a message that made him smile. "Oh, you have no idea," the developer muttered. "Wait until you see what's coming next week." Dawn broke over the arcade, the morning after the tournament, but Admiral Kexthar found the facility transformed. Military personnel had dropped their civilian disguises, and banks of advanced equipment now lined the walls. Tommy and Jessica stood in the center of it all, still processing the truth they'd just been told. "So yesterday, when we thought we were playing..." Tommy's voice trailed off as he stared at the real combat footage playing on the main screen. "You were commanding actual defense platforms," Marcus Reynolds confirmed, now wearing his Space Force colonel's uniform. "Those pirates never expected to face tactics developed by kids who treated space combat like a dance competition." Jessica watched the replay of her fleet movements, seeing them now without the gaming graphics. "All those points we scored. Lives saved." The Admiral finally spoke up, moving from his observation post. "Ships protected. You turned a potential tragedy into something the enemy couldn't even comprehend." Other screens showed similar scenes playing out in arcades worldwide. Young players were learning the truth about their favorite game, their reactions ranging from shock to excitement. "Check out the Moscow team's defense pattern," Tommy called out, already focused on learning from others. They used figure skating movements to create those gravity wells. A global channel had opened up, allowing all the young commanders to communicate directly. The military had expected panic or fear. Instead, they got something very different. "Hey, Australian team," Jessica called out through the new communication system. "Want to try combining your surfing maneuver with our basketball defense?" The Admiral watched in amazement as the children, rather than being intimidated by the reality of their actions, began eagerly sharing techniques and planning new strategies. "We've been running combat simulations for years," Colonel Reynolds explained to the growing group of young tacticians. "Nothing our best military minds developed could match what you kids created just by having fun." Tommy raised his hand, already thinking like a commander. "The neural interface devices you gave us, they're not just for games, are they?" "They're advanced fleet command links," Reynolds confirmed. "But you all use them more effectively than any trained officer. You weren't limited by traditional military thinking." The main screen displayed statistics from yesterday's engagement: 0 civilian casualties, minimal infrastructure damage, and a complete rout of the pirate fleet, all achieved by children who thought they were playing a tournament. "The best part," Jessica said, studying the real combat data, "is that we can still make this fun. We're not just fighting, we're creating something new." A message from the Tokyo arcade flashed on screen. Their team had already developed 10 new combat maneuvers based on traditional Japanese dance movements. The London group was incorporating soccer strategies into fleet formations. "This is why Earth has never been successfully invaded," the Admiral finally announced to the room. "Your species turned warfare into play, and in doing so, made it more effective than anyone could have imagined." Colonel Reynolds stepped forward with what looked like gaming badges, but were actually military commission offers. "We'd like you all to continue your training, but now you'll know what you're really protecting." Tommy and Jessica exchanged looks, then both broke into grins. "Can we redesign the command interface?" Tommy asked. "The current one doesn't flow right for the new moves we're planning." "And we need better music during operations," Jessica added. "You can't dance through space without the right soundtrack." The Admiral's final report to the Council that day included an unprecedented recommendation: suggest immediate implementation of human training methods throughout Galactic Fleet. Special focus on recruiting young officers who still remember how to play. As the day continued, the arcade remained a hub of activity, but with a new purpose. Young commanders from around the world shared techniques, created new strategies, and most importantly, kept the spirit of play that had made them unbeatable. "Ready for another round?" Tommy asked Jessica, their hands hovering over the now undisguised military controls. "Always," she replied with a grin. "I've got some new ballet-inspired moves that will make pirates dizzy just watching them." The Admiral watched as they began another session, their laughter and excitement unchanged by the weight of their new reality. Earth had found its perfect defense force, children who could turn the deadliest battles into their favorite game. 3 months after the tournament, Admiral Kexthar stood before the Galactic Defense Council, his final report on Earth's military program, drawing both amazement and concern from the assembled representatives. "The humans have not only maintained their gaming centers," he explained, displaying holographic images of the transformed arcades. "They've expanded them. What we're seeing is unlike any military program in known space." The main display showed Tommy and Jessica now wearing sleek kitted uniforms with gaming patches, teaching a new group of young players at the renovated arcade. The military equipment remained disguised as game consoles, but the training had evolved. "Watch this," the Admiral highlighted a training session. "They're teaching advanced spatial combat through dance choreography." Jessica led a group through what appeared to be a ballet routine, their movements matching the flow of spacecraft on the tactical display. Young pilots were learning to feel the physics of space combat through natural body movement. And here, he switched to another feed, showing Tommy working with an international team. They're using sports strategies to develop new fleet formations. The Council watched as children from different countries demonstrated combat maneuvers based on everything from soccer plays to chess strategies. The universal language of play had broken down all cultural barriers. Most significantly, the Admiral continued, they've started exporting their methods. 3 galactic species have already adopted modified versions of their training programs. Colonel Reynolds, now General Reynolds, appeared on the feed from Earth's Space Force Academy. The traditional military facility had been transformed, with senior officers learning from their junior cadets how to approach combat with a child's imagination. "The Anderson spiral is now standard doctrine," Reynolds reported, "and the Miller dance combat system is revolutionizing how we train pilots. But more importantly, we haven't lost the joy of it all." The feed switched to various arcade training centers worldwide. Each showed the same scene: young people eagerly learning advanced combat techniques while having the time of their lives. The line between training and play had completely dissolved. "I have a question." Tommy's voice came through as he addressed a class of alien cadets. "How do your species play? We need to incorporate your games into the system too." Jessica appeared on another screen, working with a team of xenobiologists. "If we understand how different species have fun, we can create better joint defense strategies. It's all about finding the universal joy in movement and strategy." The council chamber erupted in discussion. Some were concerned about placing such power in the hands of children. Others saw the brilliance of Earth's approach. "There's one more thing," the Admiral added, his scales shifting to a formal presentation pattern. "Earth has offered to host the first intergalactic youth defense games next year. They're calling it the Ultimate Playdate." The display showed plans for a massive event that would bring young representatives from every spacefaring species together. The goal: to share their ways of play and create new, universal methods of space combat training. "We've already registered." Tommy and Jessica appeared on the main screen, now sporting ambassador badges along with their gaming patches. "And we got some amazing new moves to share." The Admiral's final recommendation to the Council was simple: accept Earth's invitation. Let our children learn from theirs. The future of galactic defense lies not in how well we fight, but in how well we play together. As the session concluded, the feed showed one last scene from Earth. A new group of young players stood before a Starfleet commander console, their eyes wide with wonder. "Remember," Tommy told them, a veteran now teaching the next generation, "this isn't just a game, but it should always feel like one." Jessica added, demonstrating a new maneuver that combined 3 different dance styles with advanced physics. "The day we stop having fun is the day we stop being effective." The Admiral's final personal log entry reflected on his long journey from that first day in the arcade. Earth's greatest achievement wasn't teaching their children how to fight. It was remembering that the best defense of all is the pure, unbridled joy of play. In the end, that's a lesson the entire galaxy needed to learn. And in arcades and training centers across the planet, Earth's children continued to play their games, knowing now that they were part of something greater, but never losing the simple joy that had made them unbeatable in the first place. The end.